Story number one. I was in my mid-20s, dead broke, new to anxiety, and still a bit of a cynic about the idea that anything paranormal could really happen. My grandparents lived in this little rural town, one of those places with a main street, an eatery, and a church with an overgrown cemetery right beside it. It was summer. I was visiting them, and that's when my grandma took me to the church. It looked creepy, with cracked walls and black windows. I hung around after the service, walking with my grandma. I didn't notice her leave. One minute there were echoes of footsteps. The next, I was suddenly alone. The air in the church shifted, thickening with silence. I think that was the first wrong thing, how the sounds seemed to get sucked out, like being underwater. I wandered a little, but instead of the small hallway, I found myself in a different corridor, a narrow windowless passage. The overhead bulbs were weak, yellow and flickering, casting shadows along the warped walls. The air turned cold. My instinct told me to get back, but I had no idea where to go. And then, I saw it, just at the edge of my vision. Something thin, impossibly tall, like a shadow stretched out. One moment it was there, then it was gone. I did what anyone would. I stared into the gloom, heart pounding, and tried to convince myself it was just shadows. I forced myself to keep walking. My skin was prickling. I turned, squinting, and suddenly, in the blink of an eye, people appeared. The chill was gone. The lights were steady. Maybe, I thought, I looped around, and this was just an annex I'd never seen. After that, things were normal for a while. Days went on. I helped my grandpa and tried not to think about it. Sometimes, though, I'd catch weird details out of the corner of my eye. Two long shadows in the corners. My folks would have laughed if I'd said anything. It was 3 nights later when the next thing happened. I'd just gone to bed, feeling restless with the August heat. I drifted off, then suddenly felt a weird cold drip slide across my cheek. My immediate thought, maybe a bug or a leak. I jerked awake, hand to my face, but it was dry except for a cold, almost sticky trail. I looked around, but there was only silence. It was then that I felt it, that sense of being watched. Every instinct flared up, telling me not to look, but I did. Out my window stood a shape, pressed up against the glass, impossibly tall, wide with a face that wasn't human, skin stretched taut, the eyes two swollen black pits, and its mouth unhinged, revealing rows of yellowed, jagged teeth. It pressed its hand, long, thin fingers with brittle claws, against the glass, leaving a fogged, wet print. I was frozen, unable to move or breathe. The creature leaned in, close. My body locked up as if invisible ropes were tightening around my throat and chest. The pressure grew, cold fingers digging into my neck, squeezing. I tried to scream, but nothing moved. Air wheezed from my lungs. All I could see were those endless black eyes and that mouth stretching far too wide. My vision went spotty. I tried to will my body to move. Inside, panic clawed at my insides like a wild animal. There were no sounds, just the thrum of my heartbeat and the scraping of fingernails across the wood. Suddenly, a rush of icy wind blew, and suddenly it was right above me, its fingers reaching out, teeth clacking together softly. I clamped my eyes shut, praying for it to end. Sure, I was about to die or go mad. Then, nothing. When I finally dared to look, the room was empty. The only trace left was a faint, sickly odor hanging in the air and 2 thin trails of moisture fading beneath the window. I wanted to believe it was sleep paralysis, a hallucination, a trick of stress, maybe a fever dream. But when I went to splash water on my face, I noticed faint red marks wrapping around my throat. My skin felt burned. I packed my bag and left, telling my grandparents I had a last-minute call back in the city. I didn't wait for explanations or answers. Ever since then, I haven't been able to fully shake the feeling. Sometimes during the night before I fall asleep, I hear the tapping of fingers on glass or catch movement where none should be. I avoid churches and never ever look too closely at faces in the dark. Maybe I was sleep deprived. Maybe it was some sort of night terror, a panic attack, or chemicals in the old house. A logical part of me wants to chalk it up as a bad dream and nothing else. But the marks on my neck lasted days, and I know what it felt like to not be alone in the dark. Story number 2. I haven't really written about this before, but I can't stop thinking about what happened in that church even 5 years later. I mean, things make sense in daylight when you're surrounded by the noise of everyday life, but back then, in that echoey, empty church, I realized some stuff just doesn't add up. Or maybe it does, and I just can't see the math behind it. My town's pretty unremarkable, except for this huge ancient Methodist church at the corner of Main and Beach. There's a fancy graveyard out back, angel statues melted smooth by decades of rain, and a balcony that hasn't been used as long as I can remember. All my memories of it are, well, let's just say the stained glass looks prettier from the outside. Anyway, I'm not religious, and the only reason I signed up to help that day was that my coworker promised me a free meal at the reception. My job, run basic sound checks, make sure the old microphone didn't feed back during the vows. It was October, a dull, gray, windless morning that hinted at rain. I parked behind the church right at sunrise. The car lot was empty except for one beaten-up sedan that I guess belonged to Mrs. Watson, the church coordinator. Inside it was freezing, like the heat hadn't been turned on. The feeling wasn't just the cold, it was heaviness mixed with tension. Everything around me sounded louder than it should. No music, no footsteps but mine. When I signed in at the coordinator's desk, I didn't even remember seeing her. My hands shook as I ran the cable down the aisles and set up the mic on its stand. Could have been the cold, or just nerves. There's always some stress working with old tech. I tried to tune it out, but I kept catching something. Movement, maybe, in my peripheral vision, up where the balcony was. Flickering shapes like someone standing up and sitting back down in the middle of the pews up there. I ignored it. I'm an anxious person anyway, and churches are weird at the best of times. But then I looked up. I know what I saw, even if my brain begged me to find another explanation. There was a woman up there, right in the center row of the balcony. She was in all black, long dress, sleeves to the wrist, and a veil covering her face, like something straight out of a Victorian funeral. I could barely make out her hands clutching the pew in front of her. Everything else in the church was perfectly still. The woman wasn't walking, just sort of swaying side to side. The swaying seemed mechanical and hypnotic, except there wasn't any air blowing. I called up, still feeling stupid and hoping it was just someone early for the wedding, a family member maybe, but my voice just echoed back, pointless. I glanced at my phone and checked the time, then looked up again. She was gone, just empty wood and glass. I wrote it off, some trick of the light, imagination, maybe the weird sleep I'd had the night before. People started arriving soon after. The groom, the best man fumbling with his tie, Mrs. Watson bustling in and shouting about candles. The church filled with noise and the normal stress of weddings. It helped for a bit, but once the ceremony started, everything twisted sideways. I was at the back by the sound desk, watching the bride breathe in and out before she walked in. She was halfway down the aisle when suddenly the bottom hem of her dress snagged on the corner of a pew and ripped. Way too easily. I heard it before I saw it, a sick, wet sound. Talk about bad luck. She tripped, caught herself, but her veil rolled off and landed by the altar. It felt wrong, like watching something crash in slow motion. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her again. The woman in black, hovering along the far wall, just behind the groomsmen. No one reacted, nobody else even shivered. I wanted to grab someone, point her out, but the words wouldn't come. She glided right through the light-patched floor, her form flickering at times as if she was both there and not there. From that point, the church just went haywire. The temperature dropped like someone opened a freezer, and even the candles on the altar flickered for no reason. I could see my breath, but no one else acted cold. Mrs. Watson was stress sweating in her wool sweater. I kept my eyes glued to the mic levels, but every time the woman appeared, the channels spiked with static that didn't make sense. My headset shrieked with this low, guttural hum only I seemed to notice. I pulled it off, feeling dizzy. Right as the couple started their vows, timed perfectly, like in a bad horror movie, there was a popping sound from the ceiling. Lights flickered, and suddenly there was smoke. The old electrical panel in the wall beside me spat sparks, lighting up things much too fast. Nobody yelled. Maybe it didn't look like much from where they sat, but I could smell burning plastic and old wood. Instinct took over. I grabbed the fire extinguisher. The whole time this icy terror pooled in my stomach because through the haze, the woman in black stood motionless at the end of the aisle, her face aimed straight at mine. The fire didn't spread, but I swear as soon as the smoke cleared, she drifted to the far corner and leaned against the wall, her body outlined in the gray gloom. That's when I caught her face as she turned. Only half her veil had slipped loose. Her skin was grayish, and where her hair should have been, there was just mottled flesh. The lower half of her face and neck was thick with dried blood, like she'd either been weeping or choking on it. Her mouth hung partway open, red pooling at the crease, dripping down and soaking her collar. The worst part, her eyes were blank, not angry or sad, just empty. I tried to convince myself it was stress, or that I'd inhaled melted plastic, or even some weird church hallucination. But whatever happened, she started to drift up the central aisle. Every time someone stumbled or said the wrong word, she grew sharper and more present. The more chaos, the clearer she got. Eventually, I couldn't take it. I figured if I just faced it head on, maybe the logic would snap back into place. I slipped out, sweating and cold, and climbed the spiral stairs that led to the balcony. Each wooden step groaned like a voice under my feet. The light got thinner, duller, the further I went. At the top, where the balcony should have started, there was no doorway, no pews, no railing, just a solid wall, smooth and cold, and 3 tall stained glass windows. I reached out to feel for a handle or a crack, but there was nothing but stone dust and silence. The wall felt colder than ice, almost vibrating underneath, like it was holding something in. I went back down, acting normal for the rest of the afternoon, and the wedding finished. Nervous laughter, more mishaps, the usual. I asked Mrs. Watson about the balcony, and she told me, matter of fact, that there hadn't been a balcony in 50 years. It was closed off for safety years, stairs bricked over to prevent kids from sneaking up there. Even now, years later, I can convince myself about some things. The cold was broken heating, the dress was old, the fire was faulty wiring, the woman was stress and dust and shadow. Skeptics would say I hit my head or that the nerves got to me. But the memory of her face, half hidden, half ruined, with those vacant eyes, keeps me awake whenever October comes. I don't sit near church windows anymore, just in case. And I still don't know what was waiting behind that wall. Story number 3. I'd been wanting a break for a while, and when I saw that old town sign, just a crooked metal board saying Milton, I figured, why not? Google Maps didn't have much to say about it, just a handful of reviews for a single diner and a faded-out blip for a motel. The sun was on its way down anyway. My car's AC was acting up, and I'd already been driving most of the day. I guess I just didn't want to push my luck with back roads after dark. The town felt weird from the second I rolled in. Not spooky at first, just off. There were no cars on the street, no one on the sidewalks, not even the faint hum of a radio coming from an open window. The motel was a 1-story L-shaped thing, paint peeling in big flakes, but it looked open. The clerk at the front desk handed me a key with a hand that seemed weirdly pale and just nodded at the paperwork. I guess I've seen enough road motels to know this wasn't the friendliest, but it was late and I was tired. When I got to my room, it was almost too quiet. No buzzing TV through the walls, not even any pipes groaning. Swore I saw some movement beyond the glass when I drew the curtains, but I chalked it up to nerves. Didn't want to just hole up, so I decided to take a walk and maybe get a sense of the town. There was something about the way my footsteps echoed, like the air was thick, muffling everything. The streetlights flickered, some didn't turn on at all. I kept thinking I saw people at the corners of my eyes, but the 4 or 5 blocks I covered were just empty houses, boarded shops. Even the gas station had the pumps taped off. I was about to head back when I spotted the church. Crumbling stone, glass mostly blown out, and weeds taller than my knees out front. There was no sign, just a squat black cross missing one arm. The place was dark, obnoxiously dark. About to turn away, I heard this noise. A quick burst of laughter, shrilly echoing off the stone. It sounded like a kid, or maybe not. Distorted, wrong, but not hostile. Just sad, maybe? My skin prickled, and I got that feeling on the back of my neck. But instead of running, I pulled out my phone and aimed the flash toward the doorway. The beam caught the dust, swam over splintered pews and stains that looked way darker than just mold. Then in the center aisle, a small figure, just a boy, maybe 6, wiry arms pressed to his sides, grayish shirt hanging oddly. The second the light hit him, he flickered, like a bad frame in a video. Then he was gone. No sound, no movement, except the voices again, laughter overlapping, echoing too many times, with a metallic whistle cutting through that gave me an instant headache. I walked in anyway. Still can't say why. Usually I'm too jumpy for that. But it was almost like the more I walked, the farther the church stretched around me. The walls warped. The far end of the hall seemed to shimmer farther away the longer I stared. My phone's flash barely cut through. There was a half-hanging chandelier, twisted under layers of cobweb, creaking with every step I took. At one point I looked down and saw footprints in the dust, but they didn't match mine. They were too small and zigzagged near the broken pews. I was so focused on following them that I didn't even see the chandelier above. Just as I hit the center row, it ripped free with a sound like tearing metal, slamming the ground mere feet in front of me. Glass shards and rust flying everywhere. I only remember the cold bloom of adrenaline numbness, then noticed that, instead of ringing in my ears, I could only hear that same child's voice. Louder now, impossibly close and completely wrong. The kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. That's when I noticed the whistle, a brass dented thing that must have been a kid's at some point, lying neatly on the stone tiles like an offering or a trap. The air was so cold my breath came out in clouds. As I knelt to look closer, I felt this tug on my jacket. Sharp, like a cold hand closing suddenly. And then, nothing. I woke up in my motel bed, sunlight streaming in. The only sign I'd ever left was dust on my boots. For a second, I wondered if I'd dreamt the whole thing, until I noticed a faint indentation on my wrist, like small fingers had pressed there hard enough to leave a mark. I staggered up, feeling sick and uncertain, and went straight to the front desk. The pale receptionist just blinked at me with slow confusion when I asked if anyone had seen me leave last night. He said I'd been in my room all night, that no one had even checked out or moved around the motel. He said, almost offhand, that there hadn't been a church in this town for years, if ever, and that maybe I'd confused it with someplace down the highway. Tried to laugh it off with a mutter about tourists. When I got back to my room, I thought maybe I just needed to chalk it up to sleepwalking or stress. But when I put my backpack down, I heard something rattle under the bed. There, against the wall, was the whistle, the exact one from the church, glinting even though the sun wasn't hitting it. I reached for it, but the minute my fingers touched cold metal, it seemed to vibrate under my skin. And then, blink, it was simply gone, like it never existed. I packed and left within minutes, never looked back, drove whole daylight hours, every so often glancing back in the rear view, expecting something or someone to be in the back seat. It's been months now and I still see the whistle out of the corner of my eye, in bus windows reflecting faintly in puddles at the edge of my laundry pile. Sometimes I think I hear someone trying to whistle in the next room, but when I check, nothing's there. I even tried retracing my steps online. No one ever heard of Milton. The motel doesn't show up on any map. And sometimes I think I must have just nodded off at a gas station and hallucinated the whole thing. But every now and then, when things go too quiet, I get the urge to check under my bed. And late at night, crossing certain empty streets, I still hear that small, broken laugh, always just out of sight. Story number 4. I go to this old church in my town, classic red brick, spire, lots of wood and dust, creaks everywhere, and sing in the choir. We practice Thursday nights. That's where this started. I remember walking in that night. It was November, cold and clear. The church was partly heated but was never quite warm, always those drafts around the window frames. Up front, above the altar, was this huge stained glass window of St. Michael. It's dramatic. The archangel with his sword, standing over a weird, twisted demon, hellfire at the edges. That night I got in early. The choir was running late, so I sat alone on a bench, scrolling through my phone and waiting. I ended up just putting the phone away and zoning out, staring at the big window just to pass the time. As I looked at the window, I realized something felt weird. I noticed the eyes of Saint Michael, normal enough, but then they moved suddenly for a moment. I assumed maybe it was some illusion, but sitting there alone, with only the exit lights and that odd silver-blue glow filtering in, I started to feel like the eyes were not right. At first it just seemed fine, but then its pupils tilted downward, directly staring at me. Chills ran down my spine. Part of me knew it was just my imagination, but I couldn't break that feeling like someone staring. Maybe my mind wanted to see it because I was alone, and the church was quiet, every creak seeming unnaturally loud. I panicked a little. I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face. When I came back, a couple people had shown up. I made myself look straight at the glass again, and of course the eyes were normal. I laughed it off, but I thought about it all week. I started waking up more, for no reason. I brushed it off as stress or the cold. The next Thursday, nothing felt weird as I walked into the church. Practice started the same, but partway through, one of the altos shrieked. She pointed at the window, right at the face of Saint Michael. In the spot where the eyes were, the stained glass was cracked. A sharp split ran right through one of the pupils, spreading out in a spider web. It was as if someone had hit it from inside, trying to break out of the window itself. The choir director muttered something, and we all nodded along. The church was over 100 years old, but I couldn't shake that something really awful happened when I was alone in that building. A couple nights later, I was up late, scrolling. Couldn't sleep. I thought I heard singing, very quiet, not like the choir, but more like a hum. I got this mental flash of the glowing window, the cracks in the eye like it was burned into my brain, but figured it was nothing. After that week, every time I sat in the church, I felt watched physically. The feeling when someone stands behind you and the hairs stand on your neck, it was like I carried something with me from that first night. The air in the church felt like I was underwater. One night, locking up, I thought I heard glass crunch under my shoe. Out in the nave, I found a tiny chip of colored glass, red with a swirl of black in it, right under a pew halfway across the room. No idea why it would be there. The cracks in the big window had been taped over. The creepiest moment for me was a few weeks after the crack appeared. I was heading out to fetch some music sheets I'd forgotten near the altar. The rest of the choir was gone. As I reached the front, I walked through a colored patch thrown by the window, and for a second I saw the eyes moving. I nearly jumped out, but when I blinked, there was nothing there. Sometimes lights flickered in odd patterns. Books would fall open to weird pages with apocalyptic drawings. Everyone else shrugged it off. Maybe it's all explainable. Old churches creak and settle. Still, every time I'm in that church, the memory of those eyes, how the pupils rolled down, stays in the back of my head, like a nightmare. Sometimes I swear, even with the window boarded up, I can feel it, as if something in the glass is waiting for me to look away again. Story number 5. I know how this story is going to sound, and honestly, if anyone ever told me the same, I'd probably find ways to explain it away. Lack of sleep, overactive imagination, maybe some mold messing with my head. But this really happened a few months ago when I was doing my grad research on ecclesiastical architecture in England. I picked this little village with a lot of Norman influences and booked myself into a B&B, a church converted into a bed and breakfast. Romantic, right? At first it was exactly that. I liked that it was quiet. No one else was staying except a retired couple in the main hall and the landlord who kept mostly to himself. The crypt underneath the church was technically off limits to guests. It wasn't a secret or anything. There was a short half-curtained stairwell in the hall, heavy wooden door at the bottom, and a sign about heritage access, staff only. The landlord told me during the tour that they kept it sealed, except for local historians or maintenance. Out of bounds because of safety. That didn't surprise me. Most church crypts are unstable, and you really don't want guests wandering down among the bones. The weirdness started on my second night. I'd been up late reading in my room, cold rain thrumming the glass. My bathroom was in a tiny hallway off the main nave. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up with a full bladder and sleep-fogged mind. Nothing seemed strange as I made my way through the dark, apart from the usual old building creaks. My path took me past that staircase to the crypt. There was this stink, stale, not totally uncommon in old churches, so I tried not to think about it. But coming down those last steps before the bathroom, I froze. Something was moving beneath my feet. Like mice, I thought. Only it was too steady, rustling, yes, but in a slow circle. Something with a pattern, round and deliberate. Trying to laugh it off, I went past. But I couldn't ignore what happened next. A sudden draft snaked out from under the crypt door, cold enough to send chills down my spine with a thick, fetid odor. Something rotting. My eyes watered. That was enough for one night, I figured. Must be a gap in the stone, or an old drain venting up, something like that. I was still clutching that idea when I noticed the hairline crack under the crypt door. Should have been pitch darkness. Instead, something was glowing down there. A stuttering, sickly white light, flaring and receding, like someone moving around with a candle. Maybe it was the landlord doing checks, I half convinced myself. Maybe he forgot to tell me he needed something from the crypt. But it was against the rules and the place was locked. The door, when I reached out, stung my fingers with cold. I pressed gently, meaning to satisfy my curiosity without hurting anything. I swear it should have been locked, but it creaked open on the first touch. I peered in. The air felt different inside. Dense, thicker. Even sound was swallowed up. My glasses fogged, then cleared, and I adjusted to the faint blue-white light. At first, all I saw was the rough stone, old markers, patches of moss. Then I realized on the ground, spread out in a rough circle between the pillars, were people, alive. Or they had to be alive, because some of them were shifting, shuddering. Their eyes were open, wide, each face turned just slightly toward me, just enough that I could see flashes of glinting, rim-lit white. My skin crawled. At first I thought maybe this was a derelict hostel setup or some overzealous local reenactment, but there was something fundamentally wrong with their postures. Their arms were too rigid, their heads cocked at impossible angles. Their mouths moved slow and wide, jaw hinged like they were unlearning how to smile. One of them looked right at me, and I swear their tongue unspooled, black and glossy, across their chin. If you're thinking sleep paralysis or night terrors, I wish I could say that's all it was. Something darted across my foot, a hand, shriveled and cold, with nails turned gray. I scrambled back, tried to step away, but the fingers hooked my ankle and started to pull. My legs went numb with terror. I was being dragged, pulled off balance, into the darkness. Nails scraped my bare skin. I tried to scream. Maybe I did. Panic and suffocation clawed in. Just as I regained consciousness, I was on the cold flagstones outside the crypt door, crumpled like a rag doll in a draft. The light under the door was gone. I jerked up, heart pounding out a spasm in my chest, pressing my palms to the door. Locked, just as before, immovable. No light came through the crack. It looked undisturbed. For a long time, I just lay there inventing reasons. My foot, though, was itching, and it continued for weeks. The next morning, the landlord noticed my limp but shrugged, saying sometimes the stairs got slippery. I never told anyone at the B&B. Never did work up the nerve to ask the landlord about other guests who might have slept too near the crypt, or whether he'd ever seen that blue-white glow. Since then, I keep working on my thesis, still chasing weird stories from old cathedrals. The itching faded, but the memory didn't. Most days I tell myself it was some brittle crossing of wires in my exhausted brain, that what I saw was just the mind's trickster, the body's fault line. But some nights I hear again, whispers moving just underneath the floor, circling. Part of me still believes I left something behind in that crypt, or maybe something from there came back out with me. I can live with the uncertainty, but I never walk too close to basements or locked church doors after dark, and I keep telling myself I'll never know for sure. Maybe that's better. Story number 6. I always thought of churches as places where bad things don't happen. If you went to my little town's Catholic church, tucked away in Vermont woods, you'd probably feel the same. It was small, white clapboard with a steeple that was always in need of paint, and a bell with a rope that left permanent grime on your hands. My job wasn't exactly glamorous: janitor, cleaning, picking up hymnals, scrubbing the bathrooms, mopping out the old linoleum in the basement. I kept out of sight, mostly after hours. It's different being somewhere holy after everyone's gone. It's just a room with the echoes of prayers and disappointment. That's how it was until the night after one of the funerals. March, snow still stubborn along the tree line, wet tire tracks outside. The candles stood burning even after all the people had left. Part of my job, candle check, no exceptions. I never, and I mean never, mess up snuffing candles. OCD or half traumatized, take your pick. If I see an open flame where I didn't leave one, it's like an itch I can't scratch. That night I was extra careful. 5 at the foot of the altar, out. The big red glass sanctuary lamp, out. Side table candelabra, out. I did a full sweep, moving slow, shadows from the stained glass crawling across my shoulders. Something about that darkness after a funeral is heavier. You hear creaks underfoot you didn't notice before. The air's sticky, all those flowers rotting out. The bathroom garbage was full of balled-up tissues. I hauled it all out, wiped up the floors. Only me. Not a sound outside, but snow trickling from the roof. One last round for strays before locking up. That's when I saw it. On the altar in the dead center, one little white candle, flame still twitching. My stomach dropped. I knew I'd gotten that one. Not just snuffed, but pressed the wick flat. And yet there it was, gleaming fire. I told myself it was just one I missed. Annoying, embarrassing even, but explainable. Maybe the wick caught again. Maybe I didn't kill it deep enough. I set my jaw, out, damn candle or whatever, pressed the flame out with those little metal tongs the altar guild uses. Checked the wick was cool. Waited a good 2 minutes. Sniffed. Nope, nothing. Came back to the hallway to wash my hands. The tap's water came rusty for the first second, then went clear. My hands smelled sharp, burnt wax and something else, like hair singed, but sour, stinging deep in my nose. I stepped out again, just to satisfy my nerves. Except through the crack in the door, the candle was lit again. The flame was unnatural, flickering fast, making the crucifix shadow slither behind it. I felt ridiculous, but I went over, heart thudding. No matches on the altar. No one but me and my dumb broom and mop bucket. The wax around the wick hadn't melted more than it had the first time. No puddle, just the stub. Pristine. I snuffed it out with the tongs again. This time I held it longer, counted to 10, watched it smother, squeezed from all angles, till the wick was cold as stone. My hands picked up more of that chemical burnt stink, clinging and unpleasant. But when I went down the hallway, didn't even leave the building this time, just looked back in, the candle was burning. Same as before. No sound, no motion anywhere but that candle burning. I started looking for reasons. Breezes, maybe? A gust relit the wick? But it was March, all doors sealed. Faulty candle, maybe. A trick wick. But these were the bulk pack from the dollar store. There was nothing. Just me. The long-shadowed sanctuary and this same feverish flickering burning the corners of my vision. I suppose I could say I panicked a little. Not out loud, but inside something cold tightening. The third snuff out. I squished the wick with a damp rag, double-checked from every side. Still, as soon as I stepped to the back of the nave and craned my head, it was back, burning with that mad shimmer, throwing new shadows up. My brain tried to be rational. Some chemical thing? I picked up the glass. I swear it was cool. Not hot at all, even with the fire going. Not even the pop of melting wax. 4 times, 5 times. Burnt-smelling hands, eyes stinging, chest tight. I tried leaving the sanctuary doors wide open. Sure, I'd just walk in and see a dead wick. Problem solved. But the flame was always there. Sometimes I could catch it lighting itself, if you can call it that. Or just a split second, where the wick would suddenly be glowing. The whole place seemed to tighten up around me, like the air was denser, heavier, the stained glass windows dull. I started hearing things, a click of heels across tile, though nobody was there. The burnt smell got stronger each round, clinging to the altar. I started feeling watched, not from the rafters or the cross, but from the exact place the candle sat. Like if I stepped just wrong, I'd glimpse something past the flame, something that would see me back. On my sixth trip up, I didn't snuff the candle. I stared at it, my reflection twitching in the glass, and thought about how it never got lower. The wax never pooled out, the wick never charred. It just burned. There are stories about these things, I guess, but I was a janitor, not a priest or an exorcist. I wasn't religious, still am not really. I wasn't equipped for this, whatever this was. I left the church, keys left with a terse note. Got into my car, parked in the dark lot, tried to steady my breathing while that burnt candle scent still clung to me. Nobody ever saw the candle burn like I did. I tell myself it was nerves, a trick of the light. Maybe I was overtired, brain running funeral loops and making monsters of ordinary things. But even now, late nights, sometimes I catch that burnt chemical tang in the air, a whiff of scorched, wrong wax. And sometimes I see a candle, just at the edge of a window or in a darkened room, flickering like mad. And I wonder, maybe there's a reason for everything, or maybe some flames really aren't meant to go out. Story number 7. I was 10 when my parents first made me go to confession. It was late afternoon, raining so suddenly and hard that the church's stone steps ran slick, and the air inside fogged up my glasses right away. I'd never done it before, but the way the grown-ups acted, I was supposed to just go in and do what the priest said. Everything about the church felt off that day. Even the candles that should have smelled comforting were giving off some waxy, burnt stench that made my stomach churn. I remember brushing rainwater out of my hair, trying to pretend I wasn't shivering as people shuffled past in wet shoes. The line for confession moved quick. Nobody talked much, just sneezed or whispered, and the stained glass windows were dark with the storm outside. I ducked into the booth, blinking at the gloom. It was smaller than I'd pictured, just barely enough space to kneel. Right away I felt it, heavy, close, almost suffocating, like there wasn't enough air in there. The rain fell on the roof so loud it muffled everything. That's when I noticed the rasps. Not breathing, more like the sound of someone dragging their nails under the wood on the other side of the thin partition. Long, deliberate. I shrunk back a little, the seat squeaking under me. My whole body prickled with goosebumps, fear slowly crawling in. I tried to convince myself, old wood in the wet. It just creaks, that's normal. Then it turned to something more. Not nails, not wood, but a low, animal growling. Faint, but not so faint I could pretend it wasn't there. No question in my mind that I heard it. I leaned forward, mouth dry, and tried to ask if the priest, if anyone, was okay on the other side. And then just as quick, all sound dropped out. Rain, growl, wood, even my own heart. It all disappeared into a deep silence. For a second, I wondered if I'd gone deaf. My eyes tried to adjust. That's when I saw them. Eyes bright as flares, glowing red in the pitch darkness behind the partition. Not exactly human, not exactly anything. Not 2 dots of light, but like glowing coals in deep night. I froze, chills digging down my spine into my stomach. I scrambled to get out, but my hands kept fumbling for the latch. My palms felt sweat slick but cold. That's when I realized the booth's wood wasn't the same anymore. The little door was gone. Everywhere I touched, there was nothing but uninterrupted paneling. I spun around. The back was sealed behind me. It was just flat wood, every direction. The little lattice window for the priest was now solid, nothing but the dull thud of me knocking my knuckles against it. The confessional had become a box, closed and tight. Panic buzzed in my head as I pressed against the panels. Then the squeezing started. The walls nudged my shoulders, then my sides, pressing in like some kind of fist. I slammed at the wood, shouting until my throat hurt. Only muffled thuds came back. No voices, nobody noticing. And then, hands. They came from outside, more than two, misshapen but definitely hands, fingers too long, thick nails curling in under the panel's edge. I saw one finger prick a hole through. The growling came back, pissed off and desperate, reverberating through the entire booth. I could feel it in my teeth. There was the hot, meaty breath of something on the other side, pressing so close. I kept banging, sobbing by now, sure I would never get out, sure that thing was going to claw me open. And then light exploded behind my eyelids, and for a second I thought I died. But when I blinked, I was standing outside the confessional, right where I'd been before going in. My fists hurt. The rich red carpeting glowed underfoot. The priest stood in the booth, barely peeking out, calling my name in the most ordinary, bored voice you could imagine. I remember feeling so lightheaded. My parents stood by the side, frowning at me as if I'd just forgotten my own shoes. They pushed me to go inside. I did, legs shaky, trying not to look at the wood grain too closely, half sure if I blinked, there'd be hands coming through again. The priest asked for my confession. Nothing weird about him. It took all my effort not to look up at his face, afraid I'd see those glowing eyes. The air was heavy but not choking. The booth was just a booth. When I stepped out, nothing had happened. But as I left, sneaking one last glance into the darkness through the lattice, I caught it. Not even a flash, just a tiny hint of red, twin sparks hovering, unfocused, behind his shoulder. I blinked again, and it disappeared. I haven't talked about it until now. Not really. My parents took my shaking as nerves, some kid thing, and moved on. For a while I convinced myself the smell, the eyes, the hands was something I dreamed. A fainting spell or a wild imagination, stoked by too many scary films. That the booth was old and creaky, the priest's voice was weird because he had a cold or something. That I'd just gotten scared, trapped in the dark, and my mind went nuts. But the thing is, I haven't set foot inside a confession booth in 15 years. Haven't really gone back to church for anything but weddings and funerals. The few times I've walked by that same church after, even as an adult, I get that same prickle up my arms, like a temperature drop that no one else notices. Once I caught the edge of that booth's door. The wood by the handle has a pattern, lines twisting. Other people insist the church is just old and drafty. Mold and rain and rotten wood can explain weird sounds and smells, sure. Some say kids are prone to panic attacks in tight spaces, with nothing but their conscience and the dark to keep them company. I want to believe them, even now. Most nights I can almost convince myself it was all just nerves. But memory is a funny thing. The more I tell myself it was nothing, the more I remember the red that burned in the dark, the eyes that didn't blink, the hands that didn't belong to anyone at all. Maybe someone else would have a better explanation. Maybe that makes it less scary. But sometimes I really truly wonder if all the stuff people confess inside those booths ever stays on their side of the wood, or if sometimes something else is listening, just waiting for the walls to close in.